All right, so welcome. This is one of my favorite topics to discuss. I think because it deals with a lot of, it's very specific to the messaging that we're trying to teach and educate on at Fuelin, but also something that I see with so many athletes. We're all pressed for time. We all want the very best. We want to maximize performance and maximize how we eat. And I think the real food versus processed food discussion is pretty important when it comes to overall health for athletes, but also long term, the kind of performance that you're looking at and what sacrifices you want to make in terms of cooking and preparing and shopping for real food versus the impact that has on your health. So today I think we are going to really be able to dive into what constitutes whole foods. There's a good bit of discussion on that. Everyday nutrition versus race fueling, two very important but different topics and different ways to fuel. Then when and why to use packaged foods. I love whole food, but there's always a way and always a need for packaged foods. And then we'll do some Q&A at the end. As always, type questions into the chat. You can do the hand raise, flag me down, or just speak up. We're all friends here. If there's something that I'm discussing or you want to go back over it. All right, whole foods. Here's the textbook definition. Foods that are not processed naturally contain macro and micronutrients that our bodies need to function and are free from additives and other artificial substances. My short version, foods that are as close to their natural form as possible. These are the things we get from the ground, from animals, from trees. I think in general, we all have a pretty good idea of what counts as whole foods. The things you want to look for when you're planning a whole food diet, and that's variety. It's very easy for us to eat the same thing day in and day out, especially when we are trying to meet our protein goals in the app, when we are trying to, be very efficient with our time to a day training sessions. It's easy to eat that, we know what works. The smoothie for breakfast, chicken and a salad for lunch, salmon and some veggies for dinner. But variety, in order to get all of the different minerals and vitamins that our bodies need, and just to keep it interesting, variety is the way to do that. Colorful, obviously, the more colorful your plate, the more vitamins and minerals you're getting in there. And it's more fun to eat. Things that are visually appealing not only help us be more satiated, but they also make it more fun and pleasant and enjoyable to eat. Fiber, I've really noticed and placed a big stress on this recently because of a lot of the blood work that I've been looking at with athletes. And a lot of us have higher cholesterol, especially that LDL that can be dangerous long term. And fiber really is an important component of that. So when you're looking at your day, not only can I ask you to count your protein, but it's really important that you're counting how much fiber you're getting in during the day. And packaged foods are okay. Some of them have added fiber, but whole foods really are where you're going to get that soluble fiber into your diet. Women, you're looking at between 20 and 30 grams. Men, you're looking at between 25 and 35 grams of fiber every day, which is potentially easy if you are actually eating a whole food diet. It's a lot more difficult when you're relying on packaged foods or prepared foods. We can miss out on some of those. Antioxidants is the other component I really love about whole food planning and having a whole food diet. These are the things that protect us against inflammation, cancer fighters, disease prevention, and also ideally when you're looking at your whole food diet, minimally processed, minimal chemicals, pesticides, those kinds of things. Now, there are a lot of, I call them gray area foods. And I think this is where you get into the nitty gritty of what actually is a whole food diet. In theory, a whole food diet would be more on the probably raw vegan, you know, if you really want to say, I only want to eat foods that are not processed and have no additives or fillers or haven't been altered in any way, you're kind of looking at a raw food diet. Not recommended. So this is where these kind of gray area foods come in. What actually constitutes whole foods? Canned foods, tuna, beans, tomato paste. Obviously, these have been, you know, altered in some way, but most dietitians, myself included, consider these still on that whole food spectrum. Not only are they more convenient, but they're often more affordable. Canned tuna, for example, or canned salmon, you can get that wild, lower mercury fish at a much more affordable price. Tomato paste, it's actually higher in lycopene than just eating straight tomatoes. So there's a nutritional benefit there. Beans, again, if you can rinse them and get some of the sodium off or do a lower sodium, I still count these as whole foods, even though they've been altered or processed in some way. You look at things like refined grains or pre-cooked grains, so a microwave rice or a microwave quinoa. Most still consider these whole food. I certainly do. And I think this is where you want to try to find less refined and more whole grain options. So that's where you're looking at the steel cut oats versus, you know, Quaker oats, maple and brown sugar, processed packaged, as delicious as that is and convenient as that is. The pre-cooked grains, almost all of them, if you're looking at, you know, quinoa, brown rice, a wild rice mixture, any of those, again, have already been pre-cooked, but still count as whole food because they still contain their fiber. They still contain their vitamins and minerals. They're not some companies will add in, which is where you have to be careful, will add in sodium or seasonings. And again, that's kind of that fine line of you making sure that the additives in there are what you want. And then just to kind of look through a couple more: nut butters and nut milk. Again, obviously there's some processing there. You can make your own if you feel better about it, but still count both of those as whole foods. The different kinds of sweeteners, stevia, monk fruit, honey, maple syrup, again, somewhat processed, but you're looking at trying to choose the best options out of those that don't have additives in them. Then you get to things like rotisserie chicken or deli meat. And this is, again, making the best choice. That's that good, better, best you'll hear me talk about a lot. Certainly rotisserie chicken isn't the least sodium laden option, but they're healthy options. I also realize at Costco, a huge chicken is $5. And when you're trying to meet your protein requirements, that really helps the budget and also helps time. So I think how often you incorporate some of these gray area foods is really up to you and looking at your diet, but I still count them, as most do, on a whole food, real food component. Same thing with pesto, roasted peppers, some of those, again, convenience foods, but just look at the additives that they're putting in there. And then you get to things like certain bars, Kind bars, Luna bars, Picky bars. I put these more in the sports fueling category and more into the using them specifically for specific purposes. Not because I have anything against Kind bars or Luna bars or Picky bars. I love them. I just think there are, when you're doing the bulk of your diet, you know, Kind bars are nuts and seeds. I would prefer, and you would probably get more bang for your buck if you were adding nuts and seeds, say, to some yogurt instead of having a Kind bar. A Luna bar is mostly fruit. It's like dates and some nuts. You'd probably be better off having an apple and a handful of almonds. But again, that convenience factor, that efficiency factor, which we'll talk about a little later on, if you have the option to have the whole food choice, I think that's always going to be better long term. Questions about what makes up whole foods before we move on?
I have a question,
Yes.
Elizabeth. So, from like canned foods, you mentioned canned tuna,
Mhm.
beans. I know you also are not against like frozen vegetables. Is there like a measurable difference from a nutritional standpoint between something that's canned versus like fresh?
For beans and fish, definitely not. Canned vegetables leaves a little to be desired. I don't know if any of you have like ever opened a can of green beans. It's just not the same, and that's because the vegetables don't sit as well once you have to pre-cook them to put them in the can versus something like a bean that does hold well. There's less additives necessary. But when it comes to frozen vegetables or frozen fruit, just as much, in some cases more nutritious and more vitamin rich than their canned or even than their fresh options, which is why eating seasonally is such a valuable habit to adopt, because you're getting the foods at their peak nutrient density, their peak ripeness and freshness. There's different vitamins and minerals in foods at different seasons that your body might need. Um, so if you're not eating seasonally and you do want to be able to still have, you know, peaches in the middle of winter, for example, those frozen peaches would be a much better option than say canned peaches, because they'll put those in sugar, like a sugary syrup. Good question.
Great. Thanks.
All right. Here is my why whole foods first. And this is something to remember not only when you're in your everyday life, but I think long term, the message that we really want to promote is that to be a healthy athlete means you need to be a healthy human first. And this is why the quality of the food that you choose is really going to have the greatest impact. If you think about it, your training and racing fueling is such a small minuscule part of your daily life. It's the choices that you make all the other, the other 16 hours of the day that is going to have the greatest impact. So why whole foods first? First, highly nutrient dense. There's just no substitute. Even when foods will add in vitamins and minerals, it's still not the same as the original food itself. Better digestion. Real foods without additives and fillers are, food was designed, our bodies are designed, they work very cohesively together. So foods will have natural digestive enzymes in them. Foods have fiber in them that helps, to keep you from being constipated. Foods have natural water content in them, which helps keep you hydrated. So the synergy of real food is not only going to have better digestion and better absorption into your body. Your body absorbs real food in a better than a lot of packaged foods, and it keeps you regular. Real food overall for even your microbiome. It's a big buzzword these days. Whole real foods is going to give that to you. Satiety is another component. We like to eat, and a plate, if you have the equivalent of a 250 calorie bar versus a 250 calorie yogurt bowl with some nuts and seeds and fruit, we are going to be more satiated visually with the yogurt bowl, as well as feel more full and full longer with the whole food versus the bar option. Phytonutrients. So these are antioxidants. These are disease and cancer preventing components in real food that you lose in the processing of foods, and your packaged foods don't contain them at that high of a rate. You see better glucose regulation with whole food, and that's really because of the fiber. Food is I feel like I'm picking on bars today, but that's just such an easy example. bars that might have some fruit in them and maybe even some nuts, you get a different glucose response, insulin response from a Lara bar than you do from a banana with some almond butter. Your body releases more insulin to handle that Lara bar versus the banana with almond butter. You also have less crap. You're getting whole food the way that it is. Again, if you are watching out for chemicals and pesticides, you're not getting fillers and chemicals. And even though they're not as toxic as people think, over the long term, if every day you're consuming products, lots of products, because we're athletes, we have to eat a lot during the day to fuel our activity, these things can add up. And a lot of the new additives haven't been around that long. I mean, we know sweet and low isn't great for us. We didn't know that 50 years ago because it was such a new sweetener on the market. What about these different sweeteners or chemicals do we not know yet? Long-term studies. So in general, less crap, less fillers going into your body, the better. And whole food is more environmentally conscious. They depend, again, to produce almond milk, you have to use a lot of water. So there's discussion on that. But the factory farming of animals, and then the processing that goes into things like chicken nuggets, having that high of a consumption versus something that's like a whole farm raised chicken. They say the carbon footprint is less. Also the packaging that goes into and the shipping that goes into packaged processed foods. So small, on a grander scale, on a small scale, your carbon footprint might not be that impactful by choosing whole food, but together as a global society, the less packaged items that we can have, the better. All right. Now we get into a little bit of this. So everyday nutrition versus race fueling. I tried to break this down because obviously we all live in a society where we have packaged foods. I have a whole cabinet of packaged foods. Your everyday nutrition versus your race fueling. Everyday nutrition influences your ability to train, heal, and recover. This is where your diet, that, like I was saying, those 16 hours of the day, this is how it's going to impact your body and have the biggest impact on your overall health. I remember working with an ultra runner years ago, and I'm not kidding. She ate between 8 and 10 Quest bars every day. That was her diet. She was like, well, I'm meeting my protein requirements and there's some fiber in the Quest bars. And, obviously this was a disordered eating pattern. However, I think that extreme, a lot of us kind of get by sometimes on, I'll have the packaged, packaged bar, packaged yogurt, packaged, it's just easier, it's quicker. And I think if we rely too heavily on those things, instead of choosing whole food options, that's where we start to see an impact on our health. And your everyday nutrition prevents disease. So if you're looking at then comparing that to race fueling, and this partially in your training, but specifically for race fueling, it's strictly for performance. At no point in time when we're programming your race nutrition for the day, am I thinking, is this going to be enough fiber to help Scott or Kathleen get through the day, make sure they hit their 30 grams? Is this picky bar, does it have enough antioxidants to help, prevent certain cancers? Like, race fueling is performance. The goal is to make you go fast, help you maintain your focus, prevent dehydration, minimize GI issues. So it's very functional food at that point. It also has to be practical, right? And I gave some examples. In your everyday nutrition, I would always recommend a big green smoothie, I would recommend, even for a training fuel or something pre or post, some of those egg rice balls that Alan Lim has in his cookbook. But I wouldn't recommend a green smoothie for you to put in your bottle on your bike, for a multitude of reasons. So the difference there in that, just like I wouldn't tell you to consume gels or blocks if you were hungry in the afternoon and maybe feeling, like, oh, I hit that 3:30 kind of lull in my day, I need something. Oh, well, I'll grab a gel with caffeine in it. I wouldn't recommend that. Gels with caffeine are specifically training and racing focused. So I think that's where we want to make sure that when you're looking at, if I get people asking, well, if packaged food isn't good for me, why would I want to consume it? Because packaged foods they're very specifically designed for your performance. They have added caffeine in them. They have added nitrates. They have sodium. They have that mix of, we know that glucose fructose mix or combining different sugar sources, you can absorb more carbohydrates than if it was just one single source. So they have been engineered, and engineered foods have a place in our diet. It's racing and training fueling versus the everyday nutrition. Again, I think I would love to see someone just, peel open a banana in their Ironman. Like, that would be great. I think practical, no. Tasty, great, and then finding some kind of package of nut butter to to mix. In theory, a healthy, delicious option, but not practical. Could potentially make you full, doesn't have some of those other additives in it that the sports fuel has. So leading into this, when to go processed. This is, I don't have a lot of brilliant quotes, not really a known orator, but this is one of my favorites. I think I did this in a podcast with Carrie. She was asking about, consuming protein powder. And she said, she's a plant-based athlete. And she was saying, I really prefer to get my food from food sources. I don't like it that I have to take protein powder every day. And I said, I think you're missing the bigger picture. First of all, we've recommended protein powders that are free of additives and fillers and junk ingredients. But these protein powders are a very efficient, valuable way, minimally processed with sometimes added BCAAs or tart cherry juice or digestive enzymes. And I said, I don't care for fake foods, but I do care for real food made convenient. And that's where something like a protein powder comes in. That's something, where your electrolytes are valuable. And so I think anytime, like canned tuna, canned beans, packaged nut butters, I don't have the time to grind up my own nuts. So a jar of nut butter is convenient for me. So I think that's really in the back of your mind when you're thinking, am I making the healthiest choices? Are these real foods that are made more convenient for athletes? So number one, convenience and efficiency. Number two, function. In your training, do you need carbohydrates? Do you need electrolytes? Do you need caffeine or nitrates that you're not going to be able to get unless you grab them from these processed foods, these very engineered sports foods? Lower GI issues. A salad is great, not on your bike. These packaged foods have been tested. The mixes have been very specifically formulated so that you don't get GI issues. And that's, while you're training and racing, that's priority numbers 1 and 2. The palatability factor, I think, for the most part, most of us, we all have bars or gels or chews that we like and that taste good after 5 hours of riding or 2 hours of running. And what's important as your nutritionist, dietitian, is that you're properly fueling your sessions. And so it doesn't do me any good to tell you to eat cucumbers and rice balls on your bike if you don't like the taste of them. If you would rather prefer a picky bar or a Cliff bar or whatever, I need to make sure that you're fueling properly. So we want to choose foods, and most of the time those are packaged foods that you found one that you like. And then that emergency component, if you are getting low, you haven't fueled in a while and you need carbohydrates, a gel or chews are very efficient, emergency, very quick reacting sources of carbohydrates to give you that energy boost back. So I think that's where it's important to understand that it wouldn't be a great idea to maybe, eat a few slices of watermelon. It would be a good idea to have that gel or chew. Another time to go process to meet your daily macros. I could not get my protein in during the day if I didn't have a protein powder. I mean, and I like it, but fiber. I take wheat germ and psyllium husk and add those to things, and that's technically a processed food. But I know to meet my fiber goals for the day, that's something that I need. It's also useful to go processed when you need to correct nutritional deficiencies. So a lot of athletes, as I was mentioning earlier, have cholesterol issues, and plant sterols are one of the known supplements to help benefit and lower that LDL cholesterol and lower triglycerides. Plant sterols they're naturally occurring, but you would have to eat a lot of them. So there are, things like the plant sterol butters or mayonnaise that has plant sterols added to it. Heck, even some orange juices and different kind of mixes. So in that case, I would say if we're working on your cholesterol, let's find a way to get some of these packaged foods that have added plant sterols in them. If you're a plant-based eater, you just don't get a lot of calcium, it's important to buy foods that are fortified with calcium so that you can help meet some of those needs. And last, diets that exclude certain foods, or if you don't like particular foods. I will never understand it, but there are some athletes that don't like avocados. And it's like sin to me to not like an avocado, but there are some that don't like the texture. They don't like the texture of yogurt, the creaminess of hummus or whatever, or they, don't eat meat or whatever. In order to make sure that we're getting you the nutrients that you need, it's beneficial to have some of these packaged or processed foods. You can incorporate them as much or as little as you like, but if you're not eating meat, we probably have to find some other sources of protein, especially in order to balance your plant sources have a lot of carbohydrates, plant protein sources. So if we're trying to balance carbs and protein, a protein powder is probably going to be necessary in that formula for health. All right. I think I went through. I would love to open it up to discussion, maybe what some foods are that are processed or packaged that you like, and kind of how you utilize them in your daily diet to balance that whole food plant or whole food processed food.
Well, Elizabeth, I just wanted to chime in and say, like, in my mind, a key takeaway for me is, it's really a spectrum. Like, while we are a real foods, whole foods first company and approach of how we, would ideally like athletes to follow the program, we don't want it to be an all or nothing, right? It's really a spectrum, and whatever is your best choice at any given time.
Yes.
Just because you can't get like a organic, like farm raised or whatever, like doesn't mean you should just go completely the other way.
Yeah, exactly. It's the best choice that you can make in the moment is what, is what's ideal.
We do have questions that came in for folks that couldn't attend, let me pull
Yes.
those up.
I think one was about allulose, which is the new most popular keto sweetener. So it was, what is allulose, and then is it healthy? Is it processed? So it's another, again, a new sugar alternative made from plants. Lower, it doesn't raise your blood glucose. It's about, it's like 40% as sweet as sugar, so not quite as sweet, lower in calories, which again, that's why folks on the keto or diet plan seem to like it. I classify it in it's FDA approved. The European Union hasn't approved it yet as a dietary additive. That's just because they have a longer testing period. It requires 3 years with a new food. So the FDA says it's generally safe for consumption. I think we haven't done long-term studies on it, so I'm always hesitant with any kind of new chemical component. But I think in small amounts, just like it's now in most packaged foods. So I think if you limit it to, one serving a day, so whatever product you're getting it in, you're generally okay. And I think you'll know right away if it's upsetting your stomach. Some artificial sweeteners can give constipation, diarrhea, nausea, gas, and bloating. So if you experience any of those, obviously not the sweetener for you. Alternatives: stevia, which is probably my favorite sugar alternative, the most natural. People either love or hate the taste of it. It is 200 to 300 times sweeter than sugar, so it takes less. You kind of have to be aware that it's a very sweet tasting sugar alternative or substitute. There's monk fruit. Let's see, I think probably lucuma is another one. But I think at the end of the day, a little honey, a little, Canadian maple syrup, using dates to sweeten things, probably that wide, I would say natural is better. But again, if it's in a packaged product that you're buying, be mindful, but so far there aren't any detrimental effects.
Question from Scott on protein powder versus whole foods. Best percentage to hit the total daily number?
90-10, probably. People often say, how many protein shakes can I have in the day? I would say if you kind of cap that at 2 and 1, but then that pre-bed protein shake is sometimes necessary to meet your needs at the end of the day. Also, if you're lifting heavy right before bed, or the casein type of protein, so whey in the morning or plant-based protein in the morning, and then a casein at night before bed, I would say is a good amount. And I think there are some days that you can probably get away without having, a protein shake. So I don't want to make it sound like it's a mandatory daily requirement, but I think most days to meet our protein needs, a protein powder is necessary, but it should not be 3 or 4 servings a day. Again, that's where that convenience factor comes in. I realize, I've been there. It's, you're rushed and in a hurry. It's easy to grab another protein shake, but a whole food should be, 90-ish% versus the 10% of the powder. Good question.
All right, there's a few questions from Pam. I guess I'll pause. Any questions from anyone on the call before we go back to submitted questions? All right, so a few from Pam. Let's see, one question is around Are salted potatoes a good idea during the bike for an Ironman?
During your race, probably not, for several factors. Carrying salted potatoes, I don't even know where. I mean, I guess if you kind of mash them up, and there's a company now that makes like a packet of mashed potatoes. Um, it's a fuel I've used on longer training rides, just because I can like circle back home and quick grab them out of the fridge or something. During a race, the potatoes, again, only one source of carbohydrate, not that glucose fructose mix, not very fast acting. If you're looking for a salty alternative, so something less sweet, there are plenty of bars now that fulfill that are on the savory side as opposed to the sweet side. So I think salted potatoes are great. Great can be great in training. I know a lot of like century rides, they'll put those at aid stations. Great for some ultra running, again, slower digesting, but I think on race day in an Ironman, you'd still be better with a packaged option.
Great. Next question reads, being vegan, I tend to eat a lot of tofu. It can take on other flavors, so I sometimes include it with breakfast as well as having it at lunch and sometimes with dinner. I don't seem to have any adverse reactions to it. Is there a limit to how much tofu one should have in the day?
Yes, there is. People always get worried about soy. Some studies kind of gave it a bad name, thinking that it can negatively impact your hormone levels. And those studies, first of all, they were limited. Second of all, the participants were eating like huge quantities of tofu. So most of us know what a block of tofu looks like. We've all kind of seen that in the store. The participants in the studies were eating 3 to 4 blocks of tofu every day. And yeah, my reaction exactly, Kathleen. Like, that's a lot of tofu. So generally, one block is if you're eating one block every day, you're still well within the limit before seeing any kind of negative impact. And I do want to point out that soy does have very positive anti-cancer benefits. Soy isoflavones, like it's beneficial. It's one of my favorite sources of plant-based protein. It's, like Pam said, you can literally turn it into anything. If you season it well enough, cook it properly. So about 1 block a day, if you're eating that, and then a combination maybe of edamame or soy milk or things like that, you're good to go. You would have to consume a significant amount before you would see any dangerous. And then that's even if you saw a negative impact, and there just aren't enough studies to confirm that there is.
Okay. So Leonardo has a question about Endurance Tap, which is one of Scott's favorite recommendations for race fueling. Would we consider it an everyday type fuel or a processed product? Since it is technically natural,
Yeah,
because it's
yeah.
maple syrup.
Oh, you guys giving me the tough ones. I would say, I guess it depends when you're using it. I would consider it a fuel. If you want to put some syrup on your pancakes because you're having pancakes on a Sunday morning, I would say go for an Endurance Tap. Might not like me. Maybe you could squeeze it on. But I don't think it's something you want to be using in the middle of your day to sweeten your foods, but I would count that as a better option than 90% of the gels out there. I really like Endurance Tap. I like that it's clean. It's an excellent source of energy, doesn't upset your stomach. So I would say that is a whole food packaged option. It's in the gray area, but again, I wouldn't recommend it as like a snack on a Tuesday when you're watching Netflix. But for fuel, I still count that as a very clean, whole food option. And I would recommend it above the majority of the gels out there.
Yeah, and just to clarify, I mean, it is a race fuel. As part of the program, you practice race fueling during training. And so whenever you see those recommendations on like a gel every 20 to 30 minutes, that is essentially taking in endurance tap or any other kind of packaged fuel of your preference. And then just a highlight to make sure everyone's aware, we do have an endurance tap discount that you can access through the app, so you can get 20% off. They were very kind to give us that deal for our athletes.
I have a question about endurance tap. So is it 100% fructose because it is the maple syrup? I'm just looking at the package and I don't see how to identify that easily.
I don't know. Let me look the exact makeup of. So I don't know off the top of my head the makeup of endurance tap.
It says it's just maple syrup plus sea salt plus ginger.
Okay, so maple. So yes, in that case, then. It is your, let's see what the ratio is. It is, yeah, it's a small amounts, it's sucrose with a small amount of fructose. So it's not 100%, but you are getting a little bit of fructose and glucose in there.
So are there, like, I know that there's a limit on absorption of glucose, but is sucrose the same? And so is that something to be concerned about?
Nope, good question. Because there's a slight bit of fructose in there. So 60 grams is kind of that glucose limit. Whereas when you combine them, you can hit 90 to 120, depending. And that's where, like, endurance tap, why we say like eat bars as well, because then you're getting a bar and a gel, and bars will have glucose, fructose, sucrose. You're getting the full range. Why I don't like athletes to just strictly have 15 gels on the mix. So
okay.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, thanks.
That's a very good question.
Scott had a question on glucose monitors.
Oh, all right. Give it to me, Scott. What do you want to know?
Oops, sorry about that. Do they make sense, or is it marketing hype, or what is it even a useful tool to consider? What are your thoughts?
I think it is a fun tool for assessment, to potentially learn how your body responds to different fueling options. I think for the majority of us, and for the training and racing that we're doing, I think it's a not necessary expenditure, especially because those of us that are not diabetic, our body respond, like, it is naturally releasing insulin and responding to the foods that we eat on a very consistent, regular basis. That's our pancreas's job. And people will freak out when I've had athletes say, my gosh, my blood sugar spiked. It's like, well, yeah, that happens to all of us. Every time we eat, like, that's why our pancreas is working all the time. When blood sugar rises, pancreas releases insulin. These processes happen throughout the day. And so I think it can raise alarm flags for people that they don't necessarily need to have raised. I think it's, you know, I've tested it. I like data, but what you choose to do with that then, and how you incorporate it into your training and racing is, I think Scott said that he saw, was interested when he did it just to see the impact that other foods had on his diet. So I think if it's going to help change behaviors for some people and they would see it and make better food choices, it could be useful. If they saw it and learned, that they need to fuel potentially more often than they are because they weren't properly fueling on their bike, again, useful, not necessary, and potentially detrimental if you don't know how to interpret the data.
Yeah, I've personally tested the Super Sapiens, and it was interesting, but it gave me everything I learned from it was pretty much what I would have expected. Like if I eat, an endurance tap, my glucose will start going up, and then I think it's really, if you're really looking to like try to fine tune it, then maybe it could be useful, for like super elite athletes.
Yeah.
And I did share an article Scott's written in a Triathlete magazine about glucose monitors, if you're interested in understanding more about the science of how they work.
Yeah, great. Thanks. No, it's good to know about things that we should not spend too much time on. There's enough stuff to go into the rabbit hole with. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Exactly. There's probably, getting maybe a run analysis or like a detailed sodium test, blood work, like they're, if you're not a swimmer, pay for like a one-on-one swim lesson with a coach. Like I would say you'll see more of a performance gain and life gain from those things than you would a glucose, a CGM. It's funny, my brother has type 1 diabetes, and when I got a CGM and to test, he looked at me like I was crazy. Like, why on earth do you want that? Like, I have to have this on me at all times. Like, why? He's like, you endurance athletes are just nuts. I don't understand why you would want to add that component in. It's like your body functions just fine. We love data. We love science. We love anything that we think is going to give us a performance edge or advantage, especially if it's new and trendy.
One more question submitted by Pam. She says, in a race, when on the bike, is food consumption steady throughout the ride, or is there a trend up or down as the hours pass? Same question on fluids. I try to stop my consumption of solid foods at a certain point prior to the run, so I won't have digestive issues when running.
Great question, Pam. I would start off by saying this is the exact reason why we encourage carb testing and sweat and hydration testing and practicing your fueling well ahead. First of all, it's different for everyone. Second of all, the intensities that you're going to be racing at kind of dictate food and hydration consumption. Yes, you will taper off of eating before getting onto the bike, and that's where that planning process comes in. Some athletes, need a good 30 minutes before to kind of let their systems rest and digest what they've been consuming. I think it's easier to consume more early on on your bike in an Ironman, especially because you're coming off of the swim. So it's a good time once your stomach is kind of settled and you've got your equilibrium back and you're settled on your bike. I think those first 2 hours are probably a great opportunity for very consistent, maybe more fueling. Again, if you've practiced this, it's not something where, if you're trying to consume, we say your fueling should be consistent. So if you're an athlete that consumes 80 grams of carbohydrates an hour, you don't want to all of a sudden try to consume 160 grams of carbs in those first 2 hours to try to like front load it. That you're not going to see a benefit from that. You will see a benefit from consistently getting those 80 grams of carbs over the duration of your race, and then tailoring it off possibly the last 30, 45, very least 15 minutes before getting onto the bike. Hydration, consistency throughout. Cannot stress that enough. Consistently hydrate on whatever schedule that is for you, whether that's every 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, regular sipping to thirst that you've practiced and worked out, that you want to stay consistent throughout. And I had an athlete, realize they didn't finish their, fourth bottle on the bike. And so they just quick chugged it before getting off. Not a good option either. If you haven't, if you did fall behind, don't try to make up for that immediately at the end. Stay consistent throughout, and you'll be good to go. All right.
I have a quick question, a little unrelated, but somewhat related. Just more like on the daily macros. If you're sometimes near the end of the day, I find I'm falling short. So it may be after dinner. So do I have to like consume as much as I can to get the macros up? I feel like I'm like stuffed after dinner because I'm just shoveling food in to get, my daily intake.
Yeah. I would ask two things. Are you gaining or losing weight? Because if you're not getting enough in, then that could impact that goal. And if you are trying to gain muscle or whatever, then yes, we want to try to make sure that we're getting enough food and calories in throughout the day. And that's where it would be, how did your choices throughout the rest of the day? Like, how can we look at your day and maybe find where there were some holes that we could fill in with food? I think if your performance isn't suffering and it's not a regular, like, okay, it just happens to be once you didn't meet your goal and you're full after dinner, then I would say absolutely not. Don't stuff yourself just to meet that daily requirement. I would then the next day, though, be very mindful and start off early and try to plan so you're getting enough throughout the day. If you're consistently underfueled and at the end of the day you realize, oh, I'm always 45 grams below my protein, 10 on my fat, 30 on my carbs, then yeah, we need to look at the rest at consistently how we can help you to meet that throughout the day. But every now and then, if you're under and you're full, then don't.
Okay.
Yeah. And again, don't make it a habit. Nobody wants to go to bed, full, over full, I should say. All right. There we go. There it is. Key takeaway: eat whole foods as much as possible, 80 to 90% of the time. Packaged foods, use them strategically. They're there for a reason. They're not the devil. They do help us as athletes, and there are better options of packaged foods. So always look for those and try to make those smart choices.
All right. And as always, please answer the quick 2-question survey after you close out of the Zoom meeting. And we appreciate you being on. Please share your feedback with us.
Thanks for tuning in.
All right.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.